I don't mind. I don't care. I don't care how I'm described or what people say about me. I care about what's happening in the world, and what's happening in Ireland at this time could have a very significant impact on a vast conspiracy, well beyond the European Union, which it's only a part, and in slowing down its incessant and gathering progress to centralization of global power, which has been its goal all along. So, it's not just a referendum going on in Ireland about Ireland. It's actually about slowing down the incessant centralization of power, not just in Europe, but in the world, and certainly in Europe, because what is happening now in terms of centralization of power, President of Europe, Foreign Minister for Europe, in anything but name, has been planned for decades and decades and decades, and it's just playing out. It's not something that is made up as we go step by step. Well, what should we do now? Oh, let's do this. It's been planned a very long time, and they need Ireland to say yes to keep this rolling at this time.
Yeah, David, let me just jump in for anyone who really doesn't know about your work. Just quick background. As you say, these events, and specifically this referendum that we're being asked to vote on again, as you say, aren't isolated incidences that just sort of accidentally happen. Your contention is that everything is orchestrated and planned and has been for quite some time. I just want to make that clear.
I could maybe get Gabriel, just do some quick background on the big picture. I mean, for the last 20 years, I've been researching, investigating who actually runs the world full time. It's taken me to 50 countries so far, and I've written 16 books and talked to enormous numbers of people, people on the inside who want to get information out, documents, every area of research you could think of. And what you have to do is connect the dots, because if you look at a single dot, well, it might be interesting, a single subject like the European Union, but it's only when you connect the dots between apparently unconnected people, organizations, countries, cultures, that the picture starts to appear, because you're putting the pieces of the puzzle together and suddenly the picture appears. And after 20 years, I can say absolutely categorically, with enormous supporting evidence in every area you want to talk about, that this is the situation. A network of interbreeding bloodlines, families, came out of the ancient world, particularly an area of called Mesopotamia, formerly Sumer, that they said was the cradle of civilization, according to conventional historians, and became Babylon. And out of that area, now Iraq, of course, they've not gone into Iraq just for oil or just for this or just for anything. It's a number of reasons, and one of the reasons, Gabriel, is that that area of land, what we now call Iraq, Mesopotamia, has enormous historical significance for these bloodlines, for these families that are behind it. So these bloodlines expanded out of that area of the world. They became the bloodlines behind the Roman Empire. They moved up into northern Europe. They became the aristocracy and royal families of Europe. And then through the so-called Great British Empire, they exported those bloodlines and the secret society network through which they manipulate events across the world, to the Americas, to Africa, to Asia, to Australia, New Zealand, everywhere. And they then had this sleight of hand, which they called independence for the former colonies of the British Empire. And the French Empire, I mean, the French, all these bloodlines operate in all countries, but Britain is particularly important, along with Rome and the Vatican and all that side of it, which is not actually a religion of the Roman Church. It's the former Church of Babylon relocated. That's what it is if you do the research. And so you had this situation where the former colonial countries were given independence. But what actually happened was one form of dictatorship was replaced by a much more effective one. The dictatorship that was in place is a dictatorship you can see, touch, and taste. The people involved know how they stand. I'm talking about colonial rule. I mean, the former United States knew they were ruled from Britain. I'm talking communism, fascism, apartheid. All these are dictatorships that you can see, touch, and taste. You know where you are. The greatest form of dictatorship is a dictatorship you cannot see, a prison without the bars. Because people will sit in the cell forever, not realizing they're actually in a cell and thinking they're free. And so what happened was that these colonial countries, like the British Empire, etc., they on the surface withdrew, but they left behind in those countries the bloodline, their agents, and crucially the secret society network, like I say, that they used to manipulate world events. And they've gone on controlling those countries ever since. And I can describe it very simply, the structure that they've created. Imagine a spider's web with the spider at the center, and the spider is at operational level in all this in Europe. The web goes out, and each strand is an organization, a country, whatever, that is answerable to the spider. So ultimately the center controls everything. And it's structured globally like a transnational corporation. With a transnational, they have a headquarters, and then they have subsidiary companies in each country. Okay. And those subsidiary companies in each country follow the orders of the headquarters. They do what they're told, they do it as they're told, and they do it according to the corporate blueprint. What this network of families have done is set up a structure exactly like that, except they're secret societies. So you have the center in Europe, the spider, and then in each country, the United States, Ireland, France, wherever, they have a network of secret societies and bloodline families that have the job of controlling that country's finance, banking, etc., business, government, any political party that has any chance of forming a government, control of the media at ownership level, etc. And so when the headquarters says, okay, we're now going to go to this stage of the operation, then these subsidiary networks in each country go to work to introduce that in their sphere of influence. And this is why, as I've traveled the world, like I say, I've been to 50 countries so far researching this, I have seen again and again the same things being introduced in different countries at the same time, justified by the same excuses. And it's possible because of this this network, this transnational corporation, if you like, of secret societies. And this is what is operating in the European Union and what brought the European Union about. You see, from the very start, what we're now seeing the European Union becoming, a centralized dictatorship, bureaucratic dictatorship, just like the Politburo, etc., of the Soviet Union, was planned from the start. But there's two techniques that these organizations, this organization uses more than any other to advance its demands and its agenda. One, I called years ago problem, reaction, solution. This works like this. You want to change society in a certain way, and you know that if you openly just announce that's what you're going to do, you're going to get an adverse reaction from the public in large numbers. So you don't announce what you're going to do. You play problem, reaction, solution. Stage one, you create a problem. It could be a terrorist attack, it could be a war, it could be an economic collapse, whatever would produce the solution that you're looking for. You then tell the public, through an unquestioning, pathetic mainstream media, the version of this problem that you want them to believe, i.e. Bin Laden orchestrated 9/11 from a cave in Afghanistan. Well, he must have had a good battery on his cell phone then. And you want the public at stage two to react to your version of the problem with fear, with outrage, and with words to the effect of something must be done. What are they going to do about it? And those who have covertly created the problem and got someone else blamed for it, got the reaction, do something. They then offer the solutions to the problems they've created, which is why, as a result of 9/11, we are now fast entering deeper and deeper into an Orwellian state justified by fighting terrorism. Now, the other one, very, very significant to the European Union, the other mass manipulation technique I call the totalitarian tiptoe. And that works like this. You're at stage A, like they were before the common market was, the so-called free trade area was even suggested. And they knew they were going to point Z, which was a fully fledged, centralized United States of Europe, centrally controlled and controlling every area of everyone's life that lives in that region. But if they'd have announced Z or anything like it after the Second World War, when tens of millions of people died stopping the central control of Europe by the Nazis, who wanted to introduce something very similar to the European Union, then there would have been outrage. So what they've done is they sell first at AB a free trade area, nothing to worry about, good for jobs. Don't worry about it, it's just jobs, it's just trade. And then step by step, all planned, Gabriel, they talk about just to make it more efficient, if we could just have a bit more centralization of power here, it would make it more efficient and work better. And so they've gone on. And it was planned all along, and now we're reaching deeper and deeper into where they really want to go, which is that centralized dictatorship that I talked about. It already kind of is becoming that. I mean, I've seen a figure that something like 75% of laws passed and imposed on Britain now are actually originating in the European Union. And the idea is to, and Irish people need to understand this, just like British people and everyone else. The idea ultimately is to destroy nation states and break them up into regions. They want a European Union of regions, and some of the maps have even come to light.
Yeah, I had seen those maps. Now, let me just get back to something specifically within the Lisbon Treaty. We did a show last week, or a couple of weeks ago, on the Lisbon Treaty. We had Jens Peter Bond and James Reynolds from the Irish Farmers for No. Without even adding in the outcome that this group, this shadowy elite, have, what we're being asked to do is vote on a referendum that we democratically last year said no to. And it's also the same constitution, in essence, as was shot down in 2005 by both the Dutch and the French. So now in mere weeks we're going out to be supposedly voting again on this democratic treaty. Just from a factual point of view, that alone should have people asking questions without even adding in all of the information that you bring to the table and ask people to join the dots and see the bigger picture, because it's I suppose the erosion of the democracy and the illusion of democracy is being fast tracked. And for example, the signs now are up all over, say in my local area. The government, the Fianna Fáil, who's the party in power at present, have signed.
That's the hapless Brian Cowen.
I don't want to say anything just in case I get sued.
He always reminds me, whenever I see him, Brian Cowen, as a frightened little boy who's being told off. And you know, the things you're raising here, Gabriel, are absolutely right, because what this second referendum is saying to the Irish people, if they would see it, is you don't matter. We don't care what you think. I'm not kind of a kind of a prophet pulling things out of the ether. But within minutes of the Irish referendum saying no, I was saying on my website that they're going to come back for another go because the agenda had got the wrong answer. They're not interested in what the people think. This is a plan that's been playing out decade after decade since the common market was introduced, and they are not going to take no for an answer from mere people who don't matter to them. See, I've been saying for years, when something makes no sense in terms of why something's being done against all kind of evidence that it should be done, when it has no justice in terms of what's being done compared with what's just and right, and no argument or debate put forward against what is being done unjustly and irrationally apparently, then that debate has no effect whatsoever on the outcome. That's the agenda, because the agenda is not going to take no for an answer. That's the idea. And what's happening in Ireland now with the second referendum is it's the agenda of the families saying, we're not taking no for an answer. You go back and do it again. It's not the first time they've done this. This is why it was so easy to predict after the first Irish vote. They did it in Denmark. They've done it elsewhere. Hey, got the wrong result here. You go back and sort it out. And I'll tell you this, because this is the way it works. Brian Cowen would have been given his orders in no uncertain terms. You sort this out. And the reason that Gordon Brown has not had a referendum of the same kind in Britain is because he knows, and the families know, they would have massively lost it. Same with many other countries in Europe. And that's why they changed after the Dutch and French votes rejected the Constitution. They knew then it was not worth going back, because the Dutch and the French were clearly so adamant they were not going to vote yes the second time. So instead of going back on that occasion for a second vote they knew they'd lose, they just changed the Constitution into a treaty, and then say, oh, it's a treaty now, so there's no reason for referendums. And only, as I understand it, because of the Irish Constitution, is this vote ever taking place in the first place in Ireland. Without that Constitution, the Irish people would never have been given a chance to vote, because they don't want to hear what the people think. That's not what it's all about. You know, there was a Russian dissident called Vladimir Bukovsky, who visited the European Parliament in 2006, and he is a guy who referred to the European Union as a monster, an absolute mirror of the Politburo, which he knew all about. And interestingly, he said that he was given, when he was in the Soviet Union, access to official documents describing a meeting in January 1989 when David Rockefeller, who is the Rockefeller family are one of these bloodlines. Henry Kissinger, he's an agent for these bloodlines. And the French president, or former French president, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, turned up to visit Gorbachev, January 1989. Now, according to these documents reported by Vladimir Bukovsky, during the conversation, Giscard d'Estaing intervened and said to Gorbachev the following: Mr. President, I cannot tell you exactly when it will happen, probably within 15 years, but Europe is going to be a federal state, and you have to prepare yourself for that. You have to work out with us and the European leaders how you would react to that, how you would allow the other Eastern European countries to interact with it, or how to become part of it. You have to be prepared. Now, he's saying, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, in 1989, that there's going to be a federal state, and he's speaking 3 years before even the Maastricht Treaty turned the community into the European Union. And who drafted the planned the European Constitution that's now the treaty? Giscard d'Estaing. This is, people need to understand this, This is a long-term plan to enslave the people of the world, but to enslave, in the European Union case, the people of the expanding European Union. And the Irish people have a chance to put the brakes on this here, to throw a spanner in the works, and they will regret it for the rest of their lives if they don't say no again.
Undoubtedly. Again, I want to just make something clear here so that when people are listening, because what you're saying is, to me, makes sense. But it takes a while for the information to integrate itself on the inside. The signs that are all over from the Fianna Fáil party are vote yes, it's Europe is good for the economy, and other similar signs, which speaks to me that yes, we don't care about democracy. Here is what we are trying to persuade you of, which is the antithesis of democracy. And if people could just see that alone, that one fact, there's no debate, there's no information coming from the elected representatives of the human beings on this nation, in this nation. There is a persuasion and a sales pitch that's going on. If people could just see that and ask themselves, what is this about? That would be a start. So I agree completely. Now, if
Gabriel, I could say a few things about that. Because
go for it.
You're absolutely right. What we're seeing with good for the economy, and the economy is not very good, so we need to be in Europe and all that stuff. That's problem, reaction, solution. It's a fantastically extreme example of it in Iceland. Iceland wasn't talking about going headstrong into the European Union until its banking system was systematically targeted, wasn't an accident, and of course it created financial mayhem in Iceland. And now what's Iceland doing? It's being fast-tracked into the European Union because that's the way of saving the Iceland economy. Problem, reaction, solution. Frighten them to death and then offer them the savior. And the other thing is that, if you want to control a game, say a football match, it's no good controlling one side. Because if you control one side, you will influence the game. You will not be able to predict the outcome of the game, the score, before the first ball is kicked. And that's what these guys want. They're not interested in, outcomes that are uncallable. They want to make sure the outcome's as certain as they can before the process has started. So when we're looking at political parties, for instance, they don't just control one political party, and if that political party gets in, we're controlling the Irish government now, or we're controlling the British government now for the next 5 years or so. No. They control all parties that have every chance of forming a government. So whether Tony Blair or Gordon Brown is in Downing Street or David Cameron is irrelevant, because the same network of families are in Downing Street controlling events, whatever. They control the media, they control the institutions of society, and if they want to destroy a politician, they'll destroy him. And if they want to destroy a party, they'll destroy it. And for instance, what happened, this is an example of how it works. When they wanted Margaret Thatcher in power for a long time during the 1980s, they targeted the Labour Party, and they ensured that a series of leaders, and there was total insurrection and infighting during that period, and a very unpopular Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, therefore got term after term, not because the people in a majority wanted her, but they saw the opposition as completely unelectable. What happened then is they wanted Tony Blair to come in, because they have to switch parties every now and again, or people will say, hey, we're in a one-party state. It's got different masks on it and different names, that's all. So what they then did was start to undermine the Conservative Party and create infighting and disagreement and all the rest of it. And as soon as Tony Blair was elected Labour Party leader, after the convenient, shall we say, sudden death of John Smith, the leader at the time, the whole empire of Rupert Murdoch jumped for the first time in its history from the Conservative Party to the Labour Party and Blair. Through the period of Blair's 10 years, virtually all of it, the Conservative Party was targeted, and disruption undermined a series of leaders that weren't perceived to have the potential to be a prime minister, and it was like a reverse of Margaret Thatcher in the 80s. And now they're undermining Gordon Brown and the Labour Party, almost certainly to bring David Cameron in, and the same thing goes on. Now, this is a global network that has a blueprint globally in how it works. So what I've just described, Gabriel, will be happening in Ireland. And you've got Brian Cowen, vote yes. Is it Edna Kenny, the leader of the opposition, vote yes?
Yes.
I think it's Sinn Féin's the only party, as I'm reading, that's saying no. Now, this is because there is a united front fronting up for a united force that connects them all at the highest levels. Not every MP, but see, the system's controlled by pyramids. If you want to control a political party, you've got to control the top of the political party, and they dictate to the rest of the party. And if people want to be a minister or be a shadow minister or have any kind of future political career, then they've got to do what the party says. They've got to follow the party line. So all you've got to do is control the top of these pyramids, and you control the party. And so it's no accident at all that there's now this united front to vote yes, because it's all orchestrated.
Okay. You're talking there about, I suppose, leverage, and you're talking about secret societies and the Illuminati, or whatever they call themselves. Dave, what's their ultimate outcome? What does this group want?
Well, this is extremely relevant to what's happening in Ireland at this time, and the European Union. I've been writing for the best part now of 20 years. When people were laughing and saying that's ridiculous. Well, they're not saying it's ridiculous now when they read what I said nearly 20 years ago, because it's happening. They are a few compared with the global population. These bloodline families are very, very few compared with the population of the world, something like 7 billion now. And if you're the few and you want to control the many, there's a crucial foundation element that you have to do, and that's centralized decision-making. The more diversity of decision-making there is, the more points of decision-making, the more diverse it is, the less control any few can have at the center to dictate to everyone else. If they're going to do that, you have to incessantly centralize power, so more and more control and decisions affecting more and more people are made by fewer and fewer people. So, at one point we had a tribal situation in the world where people in the tribe decided the society of the tribe, if you like, and how it was run and all the rest of it. Then we moved to the next stage when large numbers of tribes were brought together under what were called nations. Now, a central point is dictating to what were diverse tribal societies deciding their own destiny, if you like. Now we're well in Europe into stage two of this, or the next stage, which is to bring the nations together under a centralized control, so that one point in Europe is dictating to every nation. My goodness, people, look around. It's happening now. It's not coming. It's just how deep we're going to allow ourselves to go into it. Now, the next stage, which I've been writing about for, again, nearly 20 years, is they want a world government, a world central bank dictating all global finance to every country, a world currency, and the euro is a stepping stone to that, a totalitarian tiptoe to it, and that world currency will not be cash or money you can pick up and look at. It will be an electronic currency, world currency, for which there are fundamental implications for freedom, because if you go into a shop now and you hand over your electronic money, your credit card, and the computer system says no, it won't accept your card, then at least you can still purchase with cash.
Okay.
When there is no cash,
can I jump in, Dave?
And that happens, there's no way you can purchase, and that's the idea.
Okay, just jump in on that point. I got something here from the Telegraph on the 7th of September 09, which is a couple of days ago. The UN Conference on Trade and Development has suggested that the dollar, which acts as the world reserve currency be replaced by a global currency.
There you go.
So they're rolling it out. Now, some people,
but very, very quickly, you know, this big financial crash, and they're going to crash it even worse. That, you know, it seems to be picking up. That's just to pull more people in. They're going to crash it again. This is all about saying massive financial global problem. The solution is a world central bank, and they are dictating the global finance. And just like that quote from the Telegraph, Gabriel, they're now openly suggesting this as an answer to global economic problems. This is how it works: problem, reaction, solution.
Now, some people would say, sound like Barry Norman there. Some people would say that a centralized one world government isn't a bad idea. Okay, a united government, like the idea that Gene Roddenberry put forth in Star Trek, and in essence, it would be brilliant. Now,
well, I don't think it would. You see,
what's the dissonance?
Well,
you don't think?
No, I tell you for why.
Okay.
The way human consciousness, or lack of it, operates now in terms of seeking power is it wants power over.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't want to devolve power. It wants power over. You know, people say power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. My father used to have a little twist on that. He used to say, and it's also the case, that power attracts the corruptible, because that's what they want. And so if you have a world government that has the power to dictate from round one table to the entire global population, you have a global dictatorship. And by the way, in that list of things I've just talked about, which is world central bank, world currency, world government, etc., world currency, whatever, they want a world army to impose the will of the world government on any country that will not accept it. That's the European army and the gathering NATO army and the UN peacekeeping operation. They're all designed to merge into this global army. It's all in the plan, and so that's the last thing we need. Now, global cooperation, yes. Global coordination, yes. A body which coordinates cooperation between different countries, that says, hey, this country's in trouble, we need to help them, we be the coordinating force to do that. Hey, there's this massive earthquake, all these people have died, and there's a catastrophe. We will be the central organizing force to have a global reaction and response to that problem. This is absolutely what we need, yes. But that is so different, Gabriel, to what is being suggested. It's not that that's being suggested. It's a central global dictatorship, not a coordinating body.
Okay, so you right there, you've hit the crux of the problem and the solution. The consciousness, human consciousness. Without the development of that, the system that comes out of or emerges from an unevolved consciousness is going to be the same as we have now. And the only way to raise consciousness in individuals and thereby raise the consciousness of our race is better education, more evolved teaching in a widespread manner. And yet the educational system now is, I think it's even becoming dumber, and it's becoming even more rote. So how would you suggest, other than making people aware of what's happening, how would you suggest that we implement something to help and aid in that consciousness expansion? Because it's the kids. They're not being given a chance right now.
Well, there's lots of things that come out of that. First of all, a wonderful quote from Albert Einstein, who said words to the effect of, you cannot solve problems with the same level of consciousness that created them. Mm-hmm. And we're going round and round and round in this world because we're having the same level of consciousness in politics, etc., that creates the problems, trying to find solutions to them. That's even within that area of politician that is not consciously involved with the conspiracy, which is most of them. Most of them don't have a clue what's going on, and because they're just puppets, just pawns. But education, yeah, wouldn't it be nice if we had some? Because we don't have education.
It would be a good idea.
We have indoctrination. You know, if you were sitting around a table 100 years or so ago, and you were having a discussion on how best you could turn children into the adults that you want them to be in terms of the way they perceive the world, the way that suits your agenda, then you would sit around the table and you'd say, I've got a great idea. I tell you what, I'm not sure they'll have this, but this would be perfect. If we could get hold of those children from the age of about 4 or 5 and have access to their minds at least 5 days a week until they are in their teens and coming up to 20s these days, more and more, then we could ensure that the vast majority of those children will become the adults that we want them to be and see the world the way it suits our agenda. And that's what we've got. And what is happening in all these different areas is the ante's being upped. That it's becoming more extreme. So we're now noticing, you quite absolutely rightly observe, and it's happening everywhere, America, Canada, England, Ireland, the dumbing down of the education system. They want people to be less and less informed, less and less educated, and underpinning this is a war on young people and children. And part of that war is the dumbing down of education and the indoctrination and programming. That's what it is. And we talk about what? On television programs, that's what they are, most of them. Programming a sense of reality, dumbing people down. Hey, don't go on the internet and search around for what's really going on in the world. Watch this game show. Watch this. Shut up. And underpinning this also is the extraordinary levels of chemical poisons and electromagnetic and microwave disruption that young people and people in general, but particularly young people, are being subjected to. You know, when you look at the graphs of so-called rising in childhood behavior difficulties and all the rest of it, and attention deficit and all this stuff they talk about, you look at the graph of the same years of the increase in chemical cocktail food additives in food and drink, and they mirror each other. The human body is an electrochemical organism. It needs an optimum electrochemical balance to think straight, to be balanced emotionally, and to be physically healthy. What they're doing is bombarding children from the earliest ages now with a electrochemical poison and disruption that is knocking that optimum electrochemical balance way out of kilter. And so they are reacting in terms of their mental state, their emotional state, and their physical state exactly as planned, because they don't want people, particularly as they're heading towards their ultimate goal of this global Orwellian state. They are heading in that direction, and they want as little opposition as possible, and they know that the children of today are going to be the adults that live in the world that they're heading fast towards, and we're heading fast towards, and they don't want them to be sharp thinkers and to be able to see it. And incidentally, talking about how this is projected forward, very, very relevant, Gabriel, to what we're talking about here. One of the very, very important strands in this network is called the Fabian Society. Fabian Society was started in 1884, and it spawned the Labour Party, and it has, to this day, a logo of a wolf in sheep's clothing. And it's named after Fabius, a Roman general, who was famous for not going for big pitch in your face on battles, but to slowly but surely undermine the opposition over a period of time. And that is the totalitarian tiptoe. That's classic Fabian society techniques. Now, two members of the Fabian Society, way back in the 30s, were a man called George Orwell, real name Eric Blair, who wrote an incredibly prophetic book, but it wasn't prophetic because he had access through the Fabian Society to the projected agenda, called 1984. And another member of the Fabian Society and a friend and associate of Orwell was Aldous Huxley, who wrote another book in 1932, it was published, called Brave New World. Now, if you put, I said this years ago, if you put 1984 and Brave New World together and you read them both, you've got where they want to take the world. 1984 concentrates on the Big Brother enforcement of the fascist state. Brave New World comes from the perspective of using drugs, manipulation, mind control, etc., and breeding programs to get a situation where a human race doesn't need the 1984 stuff because it welcomes and loves its servitude. And what a coincidence, Gabriel, that these two members of the Fabian Society that is had access and has access to that projected agenda, because this is projected, like I say, over decades and decades and decades, and they should write the two classic books, novels from their, quote, imagination, like heck, that are proving so accurate in the world that we're in now.
Okay, let me ask you a question about the Fabian Society, because I've heard Michael Tessorian talking about that group. Now, are they just, the Fabian group, are they just one more society or group in a multitude of groups? And who is at the top of the Fabian Society?
Well, if you could think of it the spider's web, or you could think of it as a pyramid structure, like Russian dolls, pyramids inside bigger pyramids inside bigger pyramids. So, for instance, you've got a bank, and the bank is a pyramid in itself because the bank manager's at the top in the local branch and he dictates to the staff. That pyramid goes into the next level of the bank, and that pyramid goes into the next level of the bank until you get to the pyramid that encompasses the whole of that bank globally, and at the top of that you've got a tiny few people who are dictating the policy of that entire bank all around the world. It's the same with secret societies. You have the Fabian Society, which at the top level will connect into other secret societies, and what they all do is feed out of the top of their pyramid into another pyramid, which are the Illuminati levels of this whole conspiracy. It's fiercely hierarchical, and it's fiercely compartmentalized. So, for instance, when you are in the Freemasons, the vast majority of Freemasons are in the bottom 3 levels of degree, called the blue degrees. They don't go any higher. And at each level, you have no idea what's being taught at the next level, and they don't know what's being taught at the next level. It's fiercely compartmentalized. This is how it works. So you've got the vast majority of Freemasons, for instance, have not a clue what that organization's being used for.
Okay.
And the vast majority of Fabians will not know what that organization is being used for. This is how it works. I'll give you a wonderful example. Towards the end of the 70s in Italy, a scandal broke involving a Freemasonic lodge called P2. And it was headed by a guy called Licio Gelli, who was an infamous fascist, a Mussolini fascist. And when they raided his house, they found documents that revealed this structure. The P2 lodge, which was an elite lodge of elite people, was broken up into sections. It contained major people in the Italian media, politics, military, business, the whole span of institutions, what have you. Each, if you like, group within the P2 had no idea that any of the other groups existed, and they had one person at the top of each group, and he only knew what was happening in his group. These people at the top then eventually answered to Gelli, And Gelly and the associates around Gelly, a handful of people, were the only ones who knew all the sections that existed and all the people that were in those sections. So you were having P2 initiates meeting each other in mainstream society, not realizing that the other one was a P2 initiate. But they were all being manipulated through this structure to advance the agenda that Gelly was pushing. And this is how it's structured. This is how it's structured to control political parties, for instance. So the vast majority of people in political parties, although those parties are controlled by the same force, have no idea that that force exists, never mind that it's controlling their party ultimately.
So the lie changes at every level.
Exactly. Very close to the spider, the key family, in fact, the spider in many ways at operational level, is the House of Rothschild. And the House of Rothschild were behind the orchestration of the European Union when it was started out as the common market. And another major bloodline family in this network that was, if you like, a specialist family in terms of the European Union is the Habsburg family. Otto von Habsburg created with others, although he was the boss, a organization called the Pan-Europa movement in the kind of the 30s and that kind of period, 30s, 40s. It was operating, and it's still operating today. And Otto von Habsburg is still the head of it. He's in his 90s now. Wow. And he and the Pan-Europa movement were the engine room that manipulated into place the common market. And one of the major front men that did it for them was a guy called Jean Monnet, who is said to be the father of Europe, the father of the European Union. Jean Monnet was a front man for these families in the Pan-Europa movement. And it's interesting that I've just got a note here in one of my books. There was a couple of writers, researchers called Mary and Serge Bromberger, who were admirers of this guy Jean Monnet and got very close to him and got access to information of the background to it, and they supported him. This wasn't an exposure. And they wrote a book called Jean Monnet and the United States of Europe. And this is what they wrote in it. It's quite brief, but it's really telling because it was so ahead of what we're facing now. Gradually, it was thought, the supranational authorities, supervised by the European Council of Ministers at Brussels and the Assembly at Strasbourg, would administer all the activities of the continent. A day would come when governments would be forced to admit that an integrated Europe was an accomplished fact without their having had a say in the establishment of its underlying principles. All they would have to do was to merge all these autonomous institutions into a single federal administration and then proclaim a United States of Europe. And that's what this treaty is all about, taking an enormous step to what clearly, wherever you look when you research this, has been the plan from the very start, and that is to create a centralized dictatorship for every country and therefore every person in Europe.
It seems to be playing out like that very much. Can I just jump back?
Yeah.
Something's popped into my head. The Aldous Huxley and the George Orwell, the two books that they wrote, 1984 and A Brave New World. Okay, if they were involved with secret organizations themselves, what was the purpose for them writing and publicizing these plans?
Well, I mean, first of all, it would seem very clear that Orwell rejected the whole idea and wanted to expose it. And you know, there have been students of the book 1984 who've actually come to the conclusion that it was actually set around the turn of the 21st century, not in 1984.
Okay.
And the reason it is said that it's called 1984 is that it was Orwell's code, because 1984 was the 100th anniversary of the Fabian Society. And he was writing to expose it. In terms of Aldous Huxley, well, this was a man who comes from a family that was heavily into eugenics. Julian Huxley, his brother, was a major leader of the eugenics, the master race movement, if you like.
Okay.
He was the first head of UNESCO. He was president of the British Eugenics Society. So he came from some dodgy background, did Aldous Huxley. Why he actually wrote that? Well, in 1932, when it came out, it was accepted by all and sundry as a novel because the idea that this was ever going to happen was just unimaginable in 1932. So it wasn't a problem in those days, and you know, even today, if you can read Brave New World, it doesn't necessarily hit people when they read it. Oh, this is what's planned to happen, or this is happening, unless you do the other background research and see the connections that Huxley had and Orwell had to understand that this was what was planned to happen all along. You know, people who research this stuff, like me, have to really hold on to appreciate that the vast majority of people in this world don't do any research. And so what we can see, because we do the research and the connections we can see, the vast majority of people don't see. So Brave New World is not any threat whatsoever to the agenda, because people won't put the dots together unless they set out to do the research to do so. And you know, it made him a lot of money
as well. Okay,
yeah.
Dave, you used to be in the Green Party back in the days, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what was that? What was that about?
Big learning experience.
Okay.
So many things have happened in my life before I started to become aware of this in around the very early 1990s, and that have been very helpful to me with what's happened since. And I was in the Green Party, and you know, I saw what was happening to the environment, and I got involved in the Green Party, and somehow in next to no time became a national spokesman in the late 1980s. And I saw from my experience on the inside that the Green Party is not a different party at all, just claims to be. It's just the same politics, dressed up with a different name and with a different dress on. And the environmental movement and the Green parties are being played like a violin over global warming. In fact, have you noticed, Gabriel, they don't call it global warming anymore. They call it climate change because temperatures are falling.
Yes. Okay.
So the Green Party also has a policy, and right back to the days when I was there, of a Europe of regions, a European Union of regions. So the Green parties have been absolutely played like a violin, manipulated at the top level also. And I see people I used to work with in the Green Party who are now MEPs and leader of the party, and I see babes in arms who are parroting the agenda and saying this is what we must do, when they are clueless what that agenda is really about and who's ultimately behind it. And you know, I just hope that Green Party members in Ireland, as opposed to their hierarchy in this non-hierarchical party, see through this and see that real Green politics, the Green politics that I came into that movement for, was not about centralization of power. It was about devolution of power. It was about giving power from the center, not to the center. And what the Green parties are saying, or certainly the British one, is, oh no, what we do is we have a Europe of regions and then we devolve power to the regions. You must be on something. That's not the idea. And you know, the giving parliaments to Wales and parliaments to Scotland, that's not about devolving power, real power to the people. It's about preparing for the breakup of the United Kingdom, for the Europe of regions.
Okay, give anybody listening a breakdown of the regions, because I have sort of an idea of what this regionalization will actually do. It'll cause more conflict by enforcing or forcing people who wouldn't naturally sit together. They'll actually force different regions to become linked and involved with other regions.
Well, so this is a very good point. I mean, the map, or one of the maps that I saw that was published actually in the Daily Mail a few years ago, and you can find it on the internet, breaks the United Kingdom up into regions. But your point is so valid, because what it does is group the regions between Scandinavia, for instance, France and Britain, not in groupings of regions within those countries, but it groups a region of one country with a region of another country with a region of another country. So this is all part of the process of absolutely destroying unity. You know, if you're a dictator, the last thing you want is any unified response to your diktats and your tyranny. You need to divide and rule. And this is what this breaking up Europe into regions and then pooling the regions of one country, region of one country with region of another country with a region of another country is about. It's about dividing and ruling and breaking up any unity of response to the edifice of power above it. It's all very, very carefully coordinated, and it's run with supercomputers. They've got computer technology, quantum computer technology, which in the public arena they're saying, oh, we're heading towards quantum computer technology. We'll be able to do fantastic things. They've already done it. And this process is to a large extent being run by these supercomputers. If you put in, this is the outcome I want, the computer will tell you the sequence of events necessary to get there. This is what they're working with. This is what we're faced with. But the key thing is that at the top, the number of people who are orchestrating this at the top of the global pyramid, the spider in the center, in full awareness of what they're doing, is tiny, fractional, compared with the global population. That's our strength, numbers. And increasingly, our strength is becoming aware of the game that's being played on us. Now, we need to come together. We need to put down the fake false fault lines of religion, of race, of country, of income bracket, because this is not a tyranny to enslave Irish people or English people, middle-class Americans, Jewish people, Islamic people, or whatever. This is a tyranny designed to enslave all of us, and we need to come together united and put the fault lines of divide and rule aside, so that we are not sitting in a prison cell symbolically a few years from now, saying and arguing about who has the best religion and who has the best this and who has the best political philosophy. It won't matter then, because it'll all be over. And this is why we need the unity. We need people to become adults, grow up, stop fighting among ourselves, and have a united response to this. And Ireland has the opportunity on October the 2nd to do that by saying no across religious belief, political belief, income bracket, and putting a massive spanner in the works of this European Union tyranny, and making a massive statement for freedom, and putting a line in the sand here. That's all possible with this vote, and that's why it's so important.
It is, and I just want to add that the no vote in and of itself will halt what is going on. Now, I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday, and again, it speaks so much about what you're doing. They were taking individual occurrences that were happening around them and taking them as separate entities, let's say the economy or health, and they were attributing incompetence and stupidity to the basically inefficient system.
That's one of the greatest tricks they use. They want people to believe it's incompetence.
Yes.
Because, Gabriel, if you don't know what the outcome is, and you see something happen, you don't know what the outcome is designed to be of that thing happening. You look at it in isolation and you say, that's stupid, it's caused chaos, look at it. Mm-hmm. But if you know what the outcome is designed to be, and the fact that that chaos will be offered a solution to bring about that outcome, then that chaos has not been brought about by bureaucratic incompetence, but by bloody genius. That's the difference. What we need to do and get out so quickly and widely is A, where they want to take us. That's the agenda they want to take us, and the world they want to create. And problem, reaction, solution, and the totalitarian tiptoe, the two key coordinates for the techniques to take us there. When people know those three things, they become infinitely more difficult to manipulate and scam than they were before.
20 years ago, it's almost, you went on the Wogan show.
Yep.
And you basically came out, and this was sort of the start of the ridicule and all that, but it was quite an outing. And Wogan could have, I suppose, dealt with it a little better, but regardless, what I want to speak about is you had, whether you call it a breakthrough, a breakdown, an awakening.
Yeah.
There was a huge shift. Can you speak to me about, and speak to everyone who's listening, what happened?
Well, it's a very long story, and it involves some absolutely extraordinary events that happened to me from the end of 1989. Oh no, from the start of 1989 right through to present day, but certainly in that, if you like, awakening period. It was extreme, some of the things that happened to me, not just in this country, but in other countries, and it led to the Wogan show. And what happened, I can see clearly now with hindsight, is, we are consciousness. We're not the physical body. The physical body is the vehicle that our consciousness uses to experience this reality. I'm sitting here at the moment in front of a computer. If I want to go on the internet, I can't just go on the internet sitting here in my chair. I have to have a conduit. I have to have a vehicle, an interface that takes me into that reality called the internet. And it's a computer. And through the computer, I can experience the internet. Well, it's a very, very similar theme in the reality that we're experiencing. The reality that we're experiencing is simply a tiny range of frequencies that we call visible light, which is really tiny. If you could see the electromagnetic spectrum, never mind the whole spectrum of existence, but just the electromagnetic spectrum, and then see visible light within it, it's tiny. And that's all that we can see. So we're actually like experiencing a television station on a very narrow band of frequency. To do that, we experience through a physical body and what we call mind. Mind-body is like the computer system. And in fact, as I've shown very clearly in my books, when you break down the way the body works, it's a computer system. It's a highly, staggeringly advanced biological computer system, and which has the ability to think for itself, which is what the immune system's doing all the time. Now, when we get caught, let me give you one other thing before I say that.
Okay.
I was in the bath about a year ago, 2 years ago.
David, behave yourself.
Yeah, I had this. Why it happened in the bath, I don't know. Maybe because I was just pondering, sitting there with me duck.
Okay.
But I had this very clear picture appear in my mind in Technicolor, and it was of a swirling mass of energy, which I immediately knew was symbolic of consciousness. It just came to me very powerfully.
Okay.
What happened then was an eye appeared in this consciousness, and on the end of the eye appeared a telescope. On the end of the telescope appeared the Earth and this universe, and then the telescope morphed into a human body, which was incredibly profound symbolism for the way we experience this reality. We are consciousness. That's what people are experiencing in near-death experiences when they leave the body and they suddenly have this amazingly expanded consciousness that they didn't have in the body. Because the body is like a lens, and it limits the range of awareness that we have access to, or it does at the moment anyway. And so when we get caught in body consciousness, when we get caught in the five senses and we filter everything through the five senses, it's like me sitting here on the internet with this computer, and the computer takes over where I go on the internet and what I think of where I go. In other words, the vehicle's taken over. And most people are in that state because the system is specifically set up to put people in that state. They don't want people with expanded awareness. They want people with 5 sense awareness, which just sees the world that this network wants them to see. What happened to me in 89 and particularly 1990, when I had an extraordinary experience in Peru, was that my mind opened. My, if you like, my lens opened. I didn't know that was happening at the time. And what poured in was an extraordinary mass of knowledge, information, concepts and insights, which just came like a tidal wave. And I was, as I look back, in that 3 months, that's all it was, that period when Icke was a nutter and all that stuff, and the Wogan show. It was only a period of 3 months. And after 3 months, everything morphed back into where it is now. But in that 3 months, what was happening was very similar to when I'm sitting at this computer. If I tap too many keys too quickly, the computer freezes and goes, sorry, can't process this. I'm not working properly. And what happened to me was I got to a point where I simply couldn't process the information that was pouring into my mind, and it froze. And in that 3 months, if you'd have asked me what planet it was on, I'd have to have checked. But like I say, after 3 months, when the Wogan show had passed and all these other things, suddenly everything morphed into clarity. And like the computer unfreezing. And people were saying to me, I thought you'd gone crazy, mate. You're the same guy I always knew. They thought I was, because I seemed outwardly that I was. But something had dramatically changed. I was now not seeing the world that I was seeing before. I was seeing things I didn't see before. And that's when the journey started of putting the dots together that's led me to what I'm doing now.
I got you. And did you meditate, or what healing modalities do you use for your own maintenance and expansion?
I don't do anything.
You don't?
I tell you, I just follow the signs of life. And I'll make this point,
okay.
Gabriel. You know, I hear a lot of stuff about meditation, and good luck to people if they want to do that, and you know, sitting cross-legged on mountains and all this stuff in the lotus position, right? I tell you what, in my experience, is all we need to do, because everything comes from it. We have to change our self-identity. People self-identify with the reflection in the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
They self-identify with their name. They self-identify with their job. None of these things are who we are. They are what we are experiencing. And David Icke is not who I am. It's what I'm experiencing. I am consciousness, expanded consciousness, just like you are, just like everyone listening to this program is, and everyone on this planet is. The difference is recognizing that and not recognizing that. And if we identify with I am Charlie Smith and I work in the store and all the rest of it, then that is the point from which we will observe the world and ourselves. And we'll see ourselves in terms of little me, I have no power, and everything is what they tell me it is. Once you simply consciously move that self-identity from I am David Icke or Charlie Jones or Ethel Smith to I am infinite consciousness, all that is, has been, and ever will be, having an experience as David Icke, Charlie Smith, and Ethel Jones, suddenly everything shifts. Not, you know, exactly that moment everything changes, but the shift starts. And that is an energetic shift, and consciousness is energy, energy is consciousness. It's a consciousness shift. And as that shifts, you start to change. You start to see things you couldn't see before. You start to perceive in a much more expanded way than you did before, and everything starts to move. Because you are moving your point of observation from who we have been manipulated to believe we are to what we really are. And this conspiracy is terrified of one thing more than anything else, because that brings the house of cards down. And that is people becoming aware of their true nature. Because that will bring the whole thing down. The whole conspiracy depends on billions of people going through their life thinking they are what the conspiracy is telling them they are. We're not. And when we understand that, everything changes.
Okay. Beautifully put. I couldn't have put it any better myself. The reptilians. Can you give a little background of where these hybrids fit, and let me know, and let everyone know what's possibly happening?
Well, they fundamentally fit. What happened in my life is once I had this extraordinary awakening, which is not just an awakening, I'm awake, it's a continuing process. You just become more and more awake.
Okay.
If you became immediately totally awake, then my experience of the computer freezing symbolically would be a fraction of what you'd experience. You'd just blow your mind. So you awaken as you're ready to awaken once the process starts. And for the first few years, my life became an extraordinary synchronistic journey of amazing coincidences, one of which happened to be in Ireland, funny enough. That was leading me to people, places, experiences, documents, books that were handing me pieces in a puzzle that was showing me how the world was controlled by a few people and how and what the goal was. Then suddenly around the mid-90s, and maybe the later 90s, about 96, something else started to come into my life as I traveled around the world. And it became a very common theme. And it was of people who had seen apparently humans, often in positions of power but not always, change into a reptilian type figure and then go back again. And you hear one or two and you think, well, that's bloody strange. And then you hear 3 or 4, and then you go to other countries and you hear 5, 6, 7, and 8, and then it's like 30, 40, 50, and these people are from all different walks of life. And if you're interested in what's happening rather than defending a belief system or worrying about what people think of you when you reveal this stuff, then you start to look at it more closely. And I started then to look at ancient texts and ancient accounts, and including biblical texts, which are just ancient texts that have been brought together in a book like other ancient texts all around the world. And I came across this very common theme, and that is of a non-human race that interbred with humans, creating a hybrid bloodline. The sons of God, which if you go take the translation further back, the sons of the gods, it really says, interbreeding with the daughters of men, is just one example in the Bible text of what you find in cultures all over the world. I then came across a man, a Zulu shaman in South Africa, who's the official storyteller of the Zulu nation, called Credo Mutwa, who called me in 1998 when I was speaking in South Africa, and my first book on this reptilian subject, called The Biggest Secret, had come out, and he just read it, and he called me, and he said, how do you know about the Chitahuri? And I said, well, who's a Chitahuri? And I went to see him when he told me, and I spent days with him talking about this at length. I did interviews with him, about 6 hours of interviews, which is available on DVD, in which he just told the story of the Chitahuri, which translates in the Zulu as children of the serpent or children of the python. And he's telling me the stories from Zulu legends going back literally thousands of years, the same stories that I'm finding elsewhere in the world. And this has gone on and gone on and gone on and gone on, and it started to become very clear that these Illuminati bloodlines that are obsessed with interbreeding and holding a genetic structure are hybrids between the human race and these reptilian entities. The Chitahuri, if you want to use that, they're called the Nagas in Hindu belief, and other names, different names around the world.
Okay.
And it's interesting because books of research into serpent worship have established and anthropologists, etc., researching into serpent worship, have found that serpent worship is the oldest known form of worship. It goes back, can be traced back 70,000 years, and the most all-prevailing form of worship across the entire, cultures of the ancient world and further back is worship of the serpent. And then, of course, you have in the Bible the symbolic story of the Garden of Eden, which all just by coincidence happens to involve the serpent, and it's to do with breeding, and it's to do with the fall of man as it's described. And what you're looking at, the exit from the garden, it was a very profound change in human society and human perception when this reptilian group started to impact and influence human society. Now, I talked earlier about the way that we can see through our human bodies only a tiny frequency range called visible light. But creation is broken up into wavelengths, frequencies. People look up to heaven as if it's in the sky. It's actually everything shares the same space that this reality that we're experiencing shares. So it's like the broadcast television and radio frequencies. They're all sharing the same space, but they're not interfering with each other because they're on different wavelengths. They only interfere, quote, impact on each other when they are very close on the dial. And it's the same with realities. What even some mainstream scientists are now talking about parallel universes. They share the same space. They're not on top of each other like chest of drawers. And so it's become clear with the years and years of research that these reptilian entities overwhelmingly operate on wavelengths just outside of visible light, and therefore cannot directly impact, at least for very long. They can come in, that's when you see the shapeshift, but they can't last very long because there's such a vibrational lack of compatibility. So to, in an ongoing way, manipulate this reality we call visible light, the world, they have to do it through human forms that they can manipulate. And the reason for the interbreeding is because everything is energy and everything is vibration. You can look through a microscope at the densest piece of metal or concrete you like, and you'll see vibrating energy, because that's what it all is if you go deep enough. And so the interbreeding, the hybrid bloodlines, have a vibrational and genetic compatibility with these reptilian entities, which means that they can be possessed, an age-old theme, right up to the present day, by these entities in terms of possession of their mental, emotional, and physical faculties by these entities. So the situation that we're facing is that the reptilian entities just outside of visible light are controlling this whole thing, and they do it through these hybrid bloodlines which operate within this reality, and we see them as human because on the level of visible light, that's what they are. But if you could see just beyond visible light, and some people can, you would see anything but a human entity overshadowing these major people in power, like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and etc. And you can think of it like this. When you see some of these pictures in laboratories where you've got a big tank, and inside the tank is somewhere the scientists can't go because it's too dangerous. But they want to work with the stuff that's inside the tank. So what they do is they stand outside the tank and they put their arms in these long gloves that go inside the tank, and they can manipulate and work inside the tank without actually being in it. Very, very symbolically, or very close to the truth, is that symbolism in terms of the way these entities manipulate through these bloodlines. That's why they're obsessed with interbreeding, and that's why the same names and families keep coming up again and again and again and again wherever you look in all these institutions and areas of the manipulation. And again, it's like subliminal, a subliminal advertisement. You can look at a subliminal advertisement and you won't see it. And then when it's pointed out, next time and every time you look at that advertisement from then on, the first thing you see will be the subliminal you couldn't see before. Why? Because what has been locked in the subconscious and manipulating us through subliminal impact now becomes conscious and no longer has that ability to manipulate, because now we can see it. And when you start to open your mind to this reptilian aspect of all this, bring it to the conscious mind, you'll be amazed at how you will start to see the subliminal, the reptilian symbolism, the reptilian references that are all there to be seen, ancient and modern.
Okay, let me just do a quick summation so I can get this clear in my own consciousness.
Okay.
Okay, so there's an interdimensional being.
Not being. It's a series of entities. It's a group. It's like a.
Oh yeah, I'm just taking one individual as an example.
On the individual level, yeah.
So there is an interdimensional shift, and the being can't actually physically move anything for long in this dimension. So they have to have an interface. So
a conduit, yeah, exactly.
Conduit. So they need a vehicle. So there's human beings who are bred with some of the lizard or the reptilian, this being's genetics,
right,
to allow basically them to enter into that form and to move around in this reality, in this dimension. Now, where did they get the genetics in the first place? Where did they get genetics in the first place for the hybrid, the host? I mean, these are deep questions, and some aspects of them still need to be answered, but they can be answered in this way. First of all, they can come into this reality. Okay.
But they can't stay for long. One of the ways that they can stay in this reality is by drinking human blood, which carries a massively powerful conduit for the human genetic code, and the human vibrational code, in other words. And this is why the connection can be made over and over again between these bloodlines and satanic ritual, human sacrifice, and blood drinking. You see, when we have this thing right across the ancient world of making sacrifices to the gods were these entities who they perceived to be gods, and they were making human sacrifices to these entities because they drink copious amounts of human blood to stay in this reality for as long as possible before they have to return to their own, because it starts to affect them vibrationally in a very negative way. It's like being in a kind of a laser beam, and it starts to affect you because it's not compatible with your vibrational state. But the other thing about genetics is this: we perceive genetics to be about sexual procreation, but everything is energy, everything's vibration, everything, and you can manipulate genetics vibrationally. Because at the end of the day, everything is vibrational. So these entities have an understanding of reality, the vibrational nature of reality, and the vibrational nature of genetics that we are not even near to understanding in mainstream science at this point. And therefore, they are able to do things like manipulate hybrid bloodlines, etc., in ways that we wouldn't even think were possible. Now, once that code, that hybrid code, vibrational DNA code, is in the hybrid, then the hybrids within this reality interbreed with each other, and they hold the code within this reality through interbreeding. Yes, that's why they have these interbreeding programs, these these bloodlines. Very, very sophisticated breeding programs through sperm banks and all that stuff. I'm not kidding you. This is real. Believe it or not, it's not for me to persuade anybody.
What do the entities want? What do the entities from the, say, outside or known dimension, what do they want coming here?
They want eventually complete control, and they want it through means of the centralization of power, through the microchipping of people. Now, all this is doing is getting more and more control of the human population, right? Mind control of the human population through various means, including microchips. The drugging of the population, the imprisoning of the population through technological means. The microchip's not just about electronic tagging. A CIA scientist told me this in 1997, that the microchip agenda was not about just about electronic tagging. It's about external manipulation of the mind, emotions, and the body of people.
Through like ELF.
Yeah,
and other stuff.
Connection to the microchip. Now, what we're building towards, Gabriel, to answer your question, is the number of people, humans, in the world today, is also vastly in excess of the reptilian entities that are manipulating. So, even if they came into this reality, they could be overwhelmed by numbers, absolutely overwhelmed by numbers. So, they have been working over this period, and they've been these entities operating just outside of visible light, that operate in a completely different timeline. God, somebody's trying to ring me out. Get rid of this. A completely different timeline in relation to ours. They have been the conduit, the common force going through what we call history. Because people have asked me a very, very good question years ago: why would all these people, these Illuminati people, going way back through history in the centuries, why would they give their lives to advancing this agenda when they knew they weren't going to be around to see the end of it? Well, it's because they've just been, if you like, agents of this force, which is the common theme through this whole period of what we call time. Their relationship to our timeline is very different to the one we have, you know, with a clock and all the rest of it. And they're building towards an end goal where they want to have a massive fundamental control of human people and mind, emotions, body. They want to cull the population by a fantastic number through manufactured diseases, laboratory diseases, and vaccination programs. That's blooming topical, given what they're trying to do to us with this laboratory-created swine flu and the swine flu vaccine. I mean, why would they want a mass global vaccination campaign for something that's causing hardly any trouble for anybody? Because it's not about swine flu. It's about what this group is seeking to do in terms of the global population. And they're working on this all the time. They're working to create a physical form that would allow them to come into this reality. And that was part of what the master race nonsense and program of the Nazis was all about. It was if you like, one of the many trial runs and experiments that are going on to try to find a vibrational form that will act as a vehicle for these entities to enter this reality and stay here for as long as humans do. You know, this.
What do they want? Why?
Well,
I can't get my head around this.
Well, get your head around this. Why does someone like Warren Buffett, who is a multi-billionaire to the tune of tens and tens of billions, why does he get up with the sun every morning and go about earning more? Why does he do that? Get your head around that. Because when people want power, and this is only one level of it, but when people want power to the extent that these entities want power over this planet, and their hybrid expressions want power because they just express the mentality of the master, it becomes an illness, a sickness, an irrational desire for control. Why do people take children and torture them and take kind of joy out of seeing the suffering of someone else? Why do they do that? Get your head around that. It's very important that people don't perceive what is possible and perceive what people will do on the basis of what they would do, because these people do not think like we do. They don't have empathy. One of the things about their genetics is that they do not have empathy. They do not have the ability to empathize with the consequences of for others of their actions. To them, tens of millions of people dead in a war is a means to an end. Greater centralization of power in the world, which is what the 2 world wars did, massively so. They don't empathize with the suffering, empathize with the people who lost loved ones. They don't empathize with the people who died in 9/11 and the families left behind. It's a means to an end. War on terror, more control, advance the agenda. We need to get our heads around this, because if we don't start to see reality and perception from where they're seeing it from, we will not understand the nature of what's happening in the world and what's planned. And we need to see it pretty damn bloody quick, because we're at a fork in the road here, and we can't stand around looking at the map any longer. We've got to start getting involved, otherwise we're going to regret it. Let's start with the referendum in Ireland.
Okay. I'm really having a tough time now. I've heard this over and over. A couple of nights ago, I've been in David Icke overload for the last couple of days, just watching and trawling through some of your work.
Yeah, let me just say this, Gabriel.
Yes.
I'm not trying to get your head around anything. I'm just giving you information. You then make of it what you will, and if you can't get your head around it and you reject it, well, good luck to you, mate. Let's have a beer and talk about the football. It's just information.
Yep.
But I am not going to be suppressed from saying what I have researched to be the case and experienced to be the case, just because people won't get their heads around it or think I'm a nutter. I couldn't give a damn. I'm interested in what's going on, not winning a popularity contest.
Okay, what I'm feeding back to you is I suppose the conflict or the lack of understanding within myself. And if I'm experiencing that, then this is more than likely the normal reaction that everybody will go through when they first are introduced to the information. So Arizona Wilder, that was the documentary that I had watched.
Right.
I found it fascinating on many levels, and not incredible, but fantastical. It was the most fantastical thing that I had encountered till date, and I've encountered some weird stuff.
You should stick around here a bit longer.
I intend to. How do you out one of these hybrids? What do you look for? What's the evidence procedure? How do I start now to expand my scope, clean my lens to see what I need to see, if this is true?
Well, I'll tell you a quick story. A friend of mine who works in the scientific and medical arena, and he has a friend who is a scientist, and his friend is not aware of the fact that I know this guy, and not aware, as far as I know, of my existence. And he's been working in the last year on something I don't agree with, this scientist, which is technology for iris scanning. It's led to him looking in very, very close microscopic detail at about 2,300, I think it was, pairs of eyes. And he said to my friend, the strangest thing about this research is I found about 4% of those eyes to be of reptilian type, and I don't understand why. 4% is about the ratio of reptilian hybrids to the general population. That would seem to me from my experience. So people are beginning to recognize that something in this area doesn't add up, and starting to recognize the whole reptilian aspect to this. When I first came across it, I put reptilian entities, reptilian extraterrestrials, reptilian interdimensionals into search engines, and I got literally a handful of pages. You put that in now, there's tens of thousands of them. So people are becoming more aware of this. But, they operate outside visible light. Unless they come into visible light, we're not going to see them. Simple as that. But, what I do now, because I've had a lot of experience of this, you can start to recognize energies, because these people have a specific energy, but you have to feel it and become to recognize it, and then you feel it coming off people. One of the ways of recognizing them that I've seen is when, no matter what their face is doing, whether it's smiling or whatever it's doing, laughing, their eyes never change. Their eyes hold a steely, cold, emotionless look. That's because the whole idea of the eyes being the window on the soul are very, very true, because the eyes are a vehicle for seeing through into a deeper level of consciousness. And that's why if you look in people's eyes, no matter what gift of the gab they're giving you, you can tell if they're genuine or not. And I'll tell you an experience that I had with regard to this. And this happened way before I was into any of this, and I didn't understand what happened until I started to uncover this stuff. I was a Green Party spokesman in 1989 when we had the one major result that we ever had in the European elections of 1989. And the opinion polls were showing that we were going to do very well. So for the first time ever, Green Party spokesmen and spokespeople, whatever you want to call them, were invited onto the election night programs as the results were coming in. And I was invited onto the Sky News election program live. I turn up. I'm taken into the makeup room. And as I walked in, the door was open, and to me, there was no one in the room. And she led me to a chair, and she said, someone will be with you shortly, walks out. I think I'm in an empty room. So I sit down, look at the mirror, as you do, and then I caught something in the corner of my eye on the right, and I turned around, and sitting there was Ted Heath, Prime Minister of Britain from 70-74, very topical given what we've been talking about here. He was the man who did more than anyone to talk Britain into the common market and actually signed us in. And I looked across to him, as you do, and, he was a former Prime Minister. He'd just been interviewed on the programme, I found out, and he was waiting to have his makeup taken off. And I said, all right, mate, how you doing? Nice to meet you. He never said a single word at any point. But what happened was this. He turned and looked directly at me, and his head never moved once he'd turned. And then his eyes were the only thing that moved, and they started at the top of my head, and they slowly worked down my body to my feet, stopped, and slowly went back again to the top of my head, at which point he turned, not ever saying a word in the entire process, and just looked at the mirror, as if I wasn't there. And all I can describe it as, he was scanning me. Now, the point of telling you this story is that while he was, quote, scanning me, his entire eyes, both of them, the whites included, went jet black. There was no color, no pupil, no white. They were jet black. And as I looked at him, as we look in the eyes of people, we have what we call eye contact. There's a point where our eyes are contacting each other and making a connection. When I looked into his eyes when they were in this blacked out state, there was no point where I could make contact with his eyes. And I described it to my family later as like looking into two black holes that just went on into infinity. And years later, two things. First of all, as I was traveling the world, I started coming across the theme of what were called the black-eyed people, and people were telling me exactly the same experience they'd had that I'd had with Ted Heath, and I hadn't told them about Ted Heath. And the other thing is that I realized that when I started to understand the way reality works and the illusory nature of reality, that I was looking at Ted Heath through his eyes into the dimension where the entity controlling Ted Heath actually operates, actually exists and manipulates him from. I mean, he's dead now. But I wrote about Ted Heath in a book, The Biggest Secret, in which I described him as a child killer and a Satanist. And a journalist called Ted Heath when the book came out and read that passage to him. And he never contacted me, never tried to stop publication, never challenged it in any way, because to do so would have brought it to the surface far more than it would have been normally, because I know from people that were involved with him that that's exactly what he was. And again, Satanism and these bloodlines go hand in hand, as does child abuse. Extraordinary common theme wherever you go with these bloodlines.
Well,
and so
quick question: why are you still alive?
Well, more people are going to see these entities and there's an energetic shift going on, Gabriel. And as it goes on, they're going to find it harder and harder to hide from us. More and more people are going to see them. Indeed, they probably are, because there's more and more talk about them all the time on the internet, etc. Why am I still alive? I've been asked that question for nearly 20 years. Well, this is the reason, and it's good news. And whether people accept this or not, I don't really care. I don't care about persuading people and what people think. I'm just saying what I've experienced and what I'm aware of, and people accept it or don't accept it. That's fair enough. But there is another force at work, which is in the process of helping people who want to help themselves, i.e. awaken, to bring this house of cards down, to bring an end to this. And that force is far more powerful if you connect with it. That's the point. People say, when's the cavalry coming? The cavalry's already here, but it's not about the cavalry coming to you, because they'd have to come down to your vibrational level. They wouldn't be the cavalry anymore. You need to awaken to access their energetic field, and then they can start to be influenced. You can start to be influenced by them in a very positive and a positive way. And it's not just as easy as you come into this world to try to make a difference, and you're making too much of a difference, so bang, bang, goodbye, get out of here. The people that get taken out are the people that are still in the 5 sense level of this conspiracy, and therefore are operating within its field of influence. If you can open your consciousness and connect with this force which is waiting to help us, get rid of this nonsense and bring back the world as it was before, paradise, before this intervention, this symbolic or more than symbolic fall of man, when humans became something far more limited than they were before, thanks to this intervention and manipulation. If you want to open awareness and connect with that force, then you won't be taken out. You won't be taken out, because it's more powerful than those who are trying to take you out. People can accept that or not accept it, but it's the truth. Okay. And so I've not been taken out, and I will not be taken out, because they can't do it. End of story. And okay, Ike's a nutter, but it's the truth, and people are going to see that. They can make life difficult for me. My goodness me, they have. But they can't take me out. And they'll make life more difficult for me in the future, the closer I get to the truth, and the more effective this information is in being circulated. Not just for me, but all the other people doing it. We've got to have a bit of backbone here and keep walking forward no matter what the challenge is. But can they take me out? No, they can't, and they won't. And eventually, this control system's coming down.
Right. So I've asked you a question, you've given an answer, and you yourself say, it's just information, you don't have to take it. Think about it and make up your own mind. Now that's democracy.
Yeah, the last thing I'm trying to do, the last thing I want to do, Gabriel, is to convince anyone of anything, because the last thing this world needs is someone else standing up and saying, I've got all the answers, you must believe me. And if you don't believe me, you're wrong, right?
Yeah.
That's the last thing we need. The world's awash. We're drowning in it.
Agreed. We don't need another Messiah.
There's some information, make of it what you will, and you know, not only am I not attached to what people make of it, it's none of my business. If I think it's my business to get people to believe what I'm saying, then I'm not respecting their ability to be their own free self. So it's information. Make of it what you will. Whatever people make of it, I'm at peace with either way or whatever.
Okay, I like that. You, David, you were scheduled to come over to Dublin, and that didn't happen. Was that what happened there?
Well, it's a strange thing, really. I was asked to come over. It was all through third parties, by the way. So I'm, speaking on the basis of what I've been told. What I'm told appears to be the truth.
Okay.
That I was invited to go over and speak and reveal at a public event, which I was going to do for nothing, and pay my own expenses, everything, to come over and present the dot connecting 2 hours, 3 hours, putting this whole Irish referendum vote into the wider context, etc.
Yes. And
it seems to be going well. Some friends of mine went over to Ireland to discuss it with some people and try to find a venue and all the rest of it. And then I just got told that there was some people within the no vote groups who were basically said they were going to cause big trouble if I went, and that me going there and speaking about this would discredit everything, and basically they weren't going to have me. So I didn't come. That was a pity. But people want the information. They've had it in this interview, mate. So it gets there in the end.
Yes, but that's one of the, I suppose, point that some people bring up when I suppose they're compartmentalizing your truth. They want you to do your work, but they don't want you mentioning the lizards.
Well, they don't want me doing my work. This group of people in Ireland, because I wasn't going to come. I was talking about shape-shifting reptilian entities and all the rest of it. I was going to talk about the European Union and the very 5 cents level of this whole European Union scam and how it connects into other areas of what's going on. You see, what it is, I said this years ago, in one of my books. People come out of the womb and they start walking. Some don't walk very far before they pitch their tent and say, here or no further. They're the people that read the Sun or whatever and believe the date, The other people keep walking, and they may become environmentalists, say. And to the people who pitch their tent first, the environmentalists will seem extreme and crazy. And other people keep walking through where the environmentalists have pitched their tent, and they get into the 5 cents level of this conspiracy, for instance, and the environmentalists think they're extreme and crazy, and the ones further back think they ought to be put away in asylum or something. And then there are others, very, very, very few, who keep walking through the 5 cents level of this conspiracy, and they keep walking, because I haven't got a tent to pitch, and I will not pitch my tent anywhere, because I'm not presumptuous enough to think that I will ever know enough to pitch my tent and say I've got it now. And as you keep walking down the road, it becomes a lonelier and lonelier place, because there's fewer and fewer people on the road. And the 5 cents conspiracy people, who the environmentalists think are crazy and the other people behind them think are lunatics and utterly insane, they start to think you're crazy and you're insane because you're walking along the road and you haven't stopped where they've pitched their tent. And what you find is what I'm saying here, that wherever people pitch the tent in terms of this is what I believe and no further, they perceive people that go on further in the same way that people further back perceive them. In other words, they're mirrors of each other while they think they're different. And all I had with the experience in Ireland there was people that had pitched their tent were acting towards me the way people were acting towards them, saying that no vote and there's a conspiracy and the EU is all a nonsense. And I do say to people, you know, have just a look when you react, in whatever way you react, at whether you are reacting in the same way as people you criticize for reacting in that way. Because it happens all the time. We all have to be very careful of that.
Yes.
That's what's happened in relation to me. But it doesn't matter, because I get the information now anyway, and those people will eventually see the fact that they were doing what others do to them. I mean, I'm in a situation now purely by keeping going when all seem lost, and I couldn't walk down any street in Britain without being laughed at by the majority of the people, and my kids were laughed at and ridiculed at school, and I could just had to turn the television on to hear my name said, and a comedian got a joke. No joke, no, got a laugh, no joke necessary. And by keeping going and sticking with what I believe to be right, I'm now talking all over the world to thousands and thousands of people at a time, and that would not have happened if I'd have given up at any scale of resistance and pressure to stop. And that's what I say that to people. If you believe in what you're doing, then you have no reason and no excuse to stop doing it just because people make life difficult for you.
Well said, sir. Well said.
Backbone here, and we're going to need some big backbone in the next few months and years before the control system comes down, because it's going to go a lot further forward in terms of its extremes before the whole thing collapses.
Yeah, it does seem to be speeding up. David, it's been an absolute pleasure connecting with you.
Yeah, it's been good, Craig. Thanks very much. I've enjoyed it.
You're welcome to come back whenever you want.
Okay.
And it's okay. Just before we end up, guys and dolls, davidicke.com. That's your official website. There is a host of good stuff on that site. So it's davidicke.com. You can visit there. You can sign up. There is tons of information right there. David, any last words?
Well, yeah, in terms of the website, you know, people can subscribe to my newsletter where I give up-to-date articles of what's going on and background stuff every week. But apart from that, everything else on the site is free. All that information you talk about, it's all free, because we need to circulate this very urgently. And do you know what's really good is that fantastic work by a lot of people over the last few months has got out so much powerful information and background knowledge about this swine flu vaccination program and the background to it and the connections and the people involved. All the same people behind the European Union ultimately. This has created a very large resistance to having the vaccine. So it's amazing what you can do if you don't take no for an answer, and you do everything you can, because people are now, and I'm the barometer for this after the last 20 years of this, people are now more open, magnificently more open in terms of numbers to things they would have laughed at or just poo-pooed not so long ago. Ever they have before. This is a very challenging time, but it's a time of great opportunity too, to make a difference in the world.
Excellent. David, thank you very, very much.
Pleasure. Thank you. behind the Roman Empire. They moved up into Northern Europe. They became the aristocracy and royal families of Europe. And then through the so-called Great British Empire, they exported those bloodlines and the secret society network through which they manipulate events across the world, to the Americas, to Africa, to Asia, to Australia, New Zealand, everywhere. And they then had this sleight of hand, which they called independence for the former colonies of the British Empire. And the French Empire, I mean, the French, all these bloodlines operate in all countries, but Britain is particularly important, along with Rome and the Vatican and all that side of it, which is not actually a religion of the Roman Church. It's the former Church of Babylon relocated. That's what it is if you do the research. And so you had this situation where the former colonial countries were given independence. But what actually happened was one form of dictatorship was replaced by a much more effective one. The dictatorship that was in place is a dictatorship you can see, touch, and taste. The people involved know how they stand. I'm talking about colonial rule. I mean, the former United States knew they were ruled from Britain. I'm talking communism, fascism, apartheid. All these are dictatorships that you can see, touch, and taste. You know where you are. The greatest form of dictatorship is a dictatorship you cannot see, a prison without the bars, because people will sit in the cell forever, not realizing they're actually in a cell and thinking they're free. And so what happened was that these colonial countries, like the British Empire, etc., they on the surface withdrew, but they left behind in those countries the bloodline, their agents, and crucially the secret society network, like I say, that they used to manipulate world events. And they've gone on controlling those countries ever since. And I can describe it very simply, the structure that they've created. Imagine a spider's web with the spider at the center, and the spider is at operational level in all this in Europe. The web goes out, and each strand is an organization, a country, whatever, that is answerable to the spider. So ultimately the center controls everything. And it's structured globally like a transnational corporation. With a transnational, they have a headquarters, and then they have subsidiary companies in each country. Okay. And those subsidiary companies in each country follow the orders of the headquarters. They do what they're told, they do it as they're told, and they do it according to the corporate blueprint. What this network of families have done is set up a structure exactly like that, except they're secret societies. So you have the center in Europe, the spider, and then in each country, the United States, Ireland, France, wherever, they have a network of secret societies and bloodline families that have the job of controlling that country's finance, banking, etc., business, government, any political party that has any chance of forming a government union. Okay. Then there would have been outrage. So what they've done is they sell first at AB, a free trade area, nothing to worry about, good for jobs. Don't worry about it, it's just jobs, it's just trade. And then step by step, all planned, Gabriel, they talk about just to make it more efficient, if we could just have a bit more centralization of power here, it would make it more efficient and work better. And so they've gone on. And it was planned all along, and now we're reaching deeper and deeper into where they really want to go, which is that centralized dictatorship that I talked about. It already kind of is becoming that. I mean, I've seen a figure that something like 75% of laws passed and imposed on Britain now are actually originating in the European Union. And the idea is to, and Irish people need to understand this, just like British people and everyone else. The idea ultimately is to destroy nation states, and break them up into regions. They want a European Union of regions, and some of the maps have even come to light.
Yeah, I had seen those maps. Now, let me just get back to something specifically within the Lisbon Treaty. We did a show last week, or a couple of weeks ago, on the Lisbon Treaty. We had Jens Peter Bond and James Reynolds from the Irish Farmers for No. Without even adding in the outcome that this group, this shadowy elite, have, what we're being asked to do is vote on a referendum that we democratically last year said no to. And it's also the same constitution, in essence, as was shot down in 2005 by both the Dutch and the French. So now in mere weeks, we're going out to be supposedly voting again on this democratic treaty. Just from a factual point of view, that alone should have people asking questions without even adding in all of the information that you bring to the table and ask people to join the dots and see the bigger picture, because it's I suppose the erosion of the democracy and the illusion of democracy is being fast tracked. And for example, the signs now are up all over, say in my local area. The government, the Fianna Fáil, who's the party in power at present, have signed.
That's the hapless Brian Cowen.
I don't want to say anything just in case I get sued.
He always reminds me, whenever I see him, Brian Cowen, as a frightened little boy who's being told off. And you know, the things you're raising here, Gabriel, are absolutely right, because what this second referendum is saying to the Irish people, if they would see it, is you don't matter. We don't care what you think. I'm not kind of a prophet pulling things out of the ether, but within minutes of the Irish referendum saying no, I was saying on my website that they're going to come back for another go because the agenda had got the wrong answer. They're not interested in what the people think. This is a plan that's been playing out decade after decade since the common market was introduced, and they are not going to take no for an answer from mere people who don't matter to them. See, I've been saying for years, when something makes no sense in terms of why something's being done against all kind of evidence that it should be done, when it has no justice in terms of what's being done compared with what's just and right, and no argument or debate put forward against what is being done unjustly and irrationally, apparently, then that debate has no effect whatsoever on the outcome. That's the agenda, because the agenda is not going to take no for an answer. That's the idea. And what's happening in Ireland now with the second referendum is it's the agenda of the families saying, we're not taking no for an answer. You go back and do it again. It's not the first time they've done this. This is why it was so easy to predict after the first Irish vote. They did it in Denmark. They've done it elsewhere. Hey, you've got the wrong result here. You go back and sort it out. And I'll tell you this, because this is the way it works. Brian Cowen would have been given his orders in no uncertain terms. You sort this out. And the reason that Gordon Brown has not had a referendum of the same kind in Britain is because he knows, and the families know, they would have massively lost it. Same with many other countries in Europe. And that's why they changed after the Dutch and French votes rejected the Constitution. They knew then it was not worth going back, because the Dutch and the French were clearly so adamant they were not going to vote yes the second time. So instead of going back on that occasion for a second vote they knew they'd lose, they just change the Constitution into a treaty and then say, oh, it's a treaty now, so there's no reason for referendums. And only, as I understand it, because of the Irish Constitution, is this vote ever taking place in the first place in Ireland. Without that Constitution, the Irish people would never have been given a chance to vote, because they don't want to hear what the people think. That's not what it's all about. You know, there was a Russian dissident called Vladimir Glukovsky, who visited the European Parliament in 2006, and he is a guy who referred to the European Union as a monster, an absolute mirror of the Politburo, which he knew all about. And interestingly, he said that he was given, when he was in the Soviet Union, access to official documents describing a meeting in January 1989 when David Rockefeller, who is the Rockefeller family are one of these bloodlines, Henry Kissinger, he's an agent for these bloodlines, and the French president, or former French president, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, turned up to visit Gorbachev, January 1989. Now, according to these documents reported by Vladimir Glukovsky, control of the media at ownership level, etc. And so when the headquarters says, okay, we're now going to go to this stage of the operation, then these subsidiary networks in each country go to work to introduce that in their sphere of influence. And this is why, as I've traveled the world, like I say, I've been to 50 countries so far researching this, I have seen again and again the same things being introduced in different countries at the same time, justified by the same excuses. And it's possible because of this this network, this transnational corporation, if you like, of secret societies. And this is what is operating in the European Union and what brought the European Union about. You see, from the very start, what we're now seeing the European Union becoming, a centralized dictatorship, bureaucratic dictatorship, just like the Politburo, etc., of the Soviet Union, was planned from the start. But there's two techniques that these organizations, this organization uses more than any other to advance its demands and its agenda. One, I called years ago problem, reaction, solution. This works like this. You want to change society in a certain way, and you know that if you openly just announce that's what you're going to do, you're going to get an adverse reaction from the public in large numbers. So you don't announce what you're going to do. You play problem, reaction, solution. Stage one, you create a problem. It could be a terrorist attack, it could be a war, it could be an economic collapse, whatever would produce the solution that you're looking for. You then tell the public, through an unquestioning, pathetic mainstream media, the version of this problem that you want them to believe, i.e. Bin Laden orchestrated 9/11 from a cave in Afghanistan. Well, he must have had a good battery on his cell phone then. And you want the public at stage two to react to your version of the problem with fear, with outrage, and with words to the effect of something must be done. What are they going to do about it? And those who have covertly created the problem and got someone else blamed for it, got the reaction, do something, they then offer the solutions to the problems they've created, which is why, as a result of 9/11, we are now a fast entering deeper and deeper into an Orwellian state justified by fighting terrorism. Now, the other one, very, very significant to the European Union, the other mass manipulation technique, I call the totalitarian tiptoe. And that works like this. You're at stage A, like they were before the common market was, the so-called free trade area was even suggested. And they knew they were going to point Z, which was a fully fledged, centralized United States of Europe, centrally controlled and controlling every area of everyone's life that lives in that region. But if they'd have announced Z or anything like it after the Second World War, when tens of millions of people died stopping the central control of Europe by the Nazis, who wanted to introduce something very similar to the European Union. I don't mind. I don't care. I don't care how I'm described or what people say about me. I care about what's happening in the world, and what's happening in Ireland at this time could have a very significant impact on a vast conspiracy, well beyond the European Union, which it's only a part, and in slowing down its incessant and gathering progress to centralization of global power, which has been its goal all along. So, it's not just a referendum going on in Ireland about Ireland, it's actually about slowing down the incessant centralization of power, not just in Europe, but in the world, and certainly in Europe, because what is happening now in terms of centralization of power, President of Europe, Foreign Minister for Europe, in anything but name, has been planned for decades and decades and decades, and it's just playing out. It's not something that is made up as we go step by step. Well, what should we do now? Oh, let's do this. It's been planned a very long time, and they need Ireland to say yes to keep this rolling at this time.
Yeah, David, let me just jump in for anyone who really doesn't know about your work. Just quick background. As you say, these events, and specifically this re-referendum that we're being asked to vote on again, as you say, aren't isolated incidences that just sort of accidentally happen. Your contention is that everything is orchestrated and planned and has been for quite some time. I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, I could maybe get Gabriel, just do some quick background on the big picture. I mean, for the last 20 years, I've been researching, investigating who actually runs the world full time. It's taken me to 50 countries so far, and I've written 16 books and talked to enormous numbers of people, people on the inside who want to get information out, documents, every area of research you could think of. And what you have to do is connect the dots, because if you look at a single dot, well, it might be interesting, a single subject like the European Union, but it's only when you connect the dots between apparently unconnected people, organizations, countries, cultures, that the picture starts to appear, because you're putting the pieces of the puzzle together and suddenly the picture appears. And after 20 years, I can say absolutely categorically, with enormous supporting evidence in every area you want to talk about, that this is the situation. A network of interbreeding bloodlines, families, came out of the ancient world, particularly an area of called Mesopotamia, formerly Sumer, that they said was the cradle of civilization, according to conventional historians, and became Babylon. And out of that area, now Iraq, of course, they've not gone into Iraq just for oil or just for this or just for anything. It's a number of reasons, and one of the reasons, Gabriel, is that that area of land, what we now call Iraq, Mesopotamia, has enormous historical significance for these bloodlines, for these families that are behind it. So these bloodlines expanded out of that area of the world. They became the bloodline